Trust boundaries, data flow paths, input points, privileged operations, details about security stance and approach. The 5 key concepts in the decomposition process. In the decomposition process, any location where the level of trust or security changes. Trust boundaries. In the decomposition process, the movement of data between locations. Data flow paths. In the decomposition process, locations where external input is received. Input points. In the decomposition process, any activity that requires greater privileges than of a standard user account or process, typically required to make system changes or alter security. Privileged operations. In the decomposition process, the declaration of the security policy, security foundations, and security assumptions. Details about security stance and approach. The concept that most computers, devices, networks, and systems are not built by a single entity. Supply chain. T or F. When evaluating a third party for your security integration, you should consider the following processes: on-site assessment, document exchange and review, process policy review, third-party audit. Investigate the means by which data sets and documentation are exchanged as well as the formal processes by which they perform assessments and reviews. Document exchange and review. Visit the site of the organization to interview personnel and observe their operating habits. On-site assessment. Request copies of their security policies, processes, procedures, and documentation of incidents and responses for review. Process policy review. Third-party audit. This is the collection of practices related to supporting, defining, and directing the security efforts of an organization. This is closely related to and often intertwined with corporate and IT governance. Security governance. Third-party governance. Documentation review. The process by which the goals of risk management are achieved. Risk analysis. Asset. Asset valuation. Threats. The weakness in an asset or the absence or the weakness of a safeguard or countermeasure. Vulnerability. Being susceptible to asset loss because of a threat. Exposure. The possibility or likelihood that a threat will exploit a vulnerability to cause harm to an asset. Risk. T or F. Risk equals threat vulnerability. True. Safeguards. Attack. A blank is the occurrence of a security mechanism being bypassed or thwarted by a threat agent. When a blank is combined with an attack, a penetration or intrusion can result. Breach. A blank is the condition in which a threat agent has gained access to an organization's infrastructure through the circumvention of security controls and is able to directly imperil assets. Penetration. A type of risk analysis that assigns real dollar figures to the loss of an asset. Quantitative risk analysis. A type of risk analysis that assigns subjective and intangible values to the loss of an asset. Qualitative risk analysis. Step 1. Inventory assets and assign a value. Step 2. Research each asset. Step 3. Perform a threat analysis. Step 4. Derive the overall loss. Step 5. Research countermeasures. Step 6. Perform a cost-benefit analysis. The 6 major steps or phases in quantitative risk analysis. A step in the quantitative risk analysis: inventory assets and assign a value. Step 1. Inventory assets and assign a value. A step in the quantitative risk analysis: research countermeasures for each threat and then calculate the changes to ARO and AL based on an applied countermeasure. Step 5. Research countermeasures. A step in the quantitative risk analysis: research each asset and produce a list of all possible threats of each individual asset. For each listed threat, calculate the exposure factor and single loss expectancy. Step 2. Research each asset. A step in the quantitative risk analysis: perform a cost-benefit analysis of each countermeasure for each threat. For each asset, select the most appropriate response to each threat. Step 6. Perform a cost-benefit analysis. A step in the quantitative risk analysis: derive the overall loss potential per threat by calculating the annualized loss expectancy. Step 4. Derive the overall loss. Perform a threat analysis to calculate the likelihood of each threat being realized within a single year, that is, the annualized rate of occurrence. Step 3. Perform a threat analysis. The 6 major elements of quantitative risk analysis. 1. Assign asset value. 2. Calculate exposure factor. 3. Calculate single loss expectancy. 4. Assess the annualized rate of occurrence. 5. Derive the annualized loss expectancy. 6. Perform cost-benefit analysis. Exposure factor. The EF is needed to calculate the blank. The blank is the cost associated with a single realized risk against a specific asset. It indicates the exact amount of loss an organization would experience if an asset were harmed by a specific threat occurring. Single loss expectancy. T or F. The SLE is calculated using the following formula: SLE equals asset value exposure factor, or more simply, SLE equals AVEF. True. For example, the SLE is expressed in a dollar value. For example, if an asset is valued at $200,000 and it has an EF of 45% for a specific threat, then the SLE of the threat for that asset is $90,000. Annualized rate of occurrence. For example, the ARO of an earthquake in Tulsa may be 0.00001, whereas the ARO of an earthquake in San Francisco may be 0.03, or you can compare the ARO of an earthquake in Tulsa of 0.00001 to the ARO of an email virus in an office in Tulsa of 10 million. T or F. The AL is calculated using the following formula: AL equals single loss expectancy annualized rate of occurrence, or more simply, AL equals SLE/RO. True. For example, if the SLE of an asset is $90,000 and the ARO for a specific threat is 0.5, then the AL is $45,000. On the other hand, if the ARO for a specific threat is 15, then the AL would be $1,350,000. Cost of purchase, development, and licensing, cost of implementation and customization, cost of annual operation, maintenance, administration, and so on, cost of annual repairs and upgrades, productivity improvement or loss changes to environment, cost of testing and evaluation. Factors involved in calculating the value of a countermeasure. T or F. The annual costs of safeguards should not exceed the expected annual cost of asset loss. True. AL before safeguard, AL after implementing the safeguard, annual cost of safeguard equals value of the safeguard to the company. Calculating safeguard cost benefit. Blank analysis is more scenario-based than it is calculator-based. Rather than assigning exact dollar figures to possible losses, you rank threats on a scale to evaluate their risks, costs, and effects. Scenario. The blank is simply an anonymous feedback and response process used to enable a group to reach an anonymous consensus. Its primary purpose is to elicit honest and uninfluenced responses from all participants. Delphi Technique. Reduce or mitigate, assign or transfer, accept, deter, avoid, reject or ignore. Responses to risk. The implementation of safeguards and countermeasures to eliminate vulnerabilities or block threats. Picking the most cost-effective or beneficial countermeasure is part of risk management, but it is not an element of risk assessment. Risk mitigation. The placement of the cost of loss of risk represents onto another entity or organization. Purchasing insurance and outsourcing are common forms of blank. Risk assignment, aka risk transferring. The result after a cost-benefit analysis shows countermeasure costs would outweigh the possible cost of loss due to risk. It also means that management has agreed to accept the consequences and the loss if the risk is realized. Risk acceptance. Risk deterrence. Risk avoidance. A final but unacceptable possible response to risk is to reject risk or ignore risk. Denying that a risk exists and hoping that it will never be realized are not valid or prudent due care responses to risk. Risk rejection. Once countermeasures are implemented, the risk that remains is known as blank, the risk that management has chosen to accept rather than mitigate. Residual risk. Total risk controls gap equals residual risk. The amount of risk an organization would face if no safeguards were implemented. Threats, vulnerabilities, asset value equals total risk. Total risk. Technical control, aka logical control. Administrative controls, aka management controls. Physical controls. A security control that is deployed to discourage violation of security policies. They often depend on individuals deciding not to take an unwanted action. Deterrent control. A security control that is deployed to thwart or stop unwanted or unauthorized activity from occurring. Preventive control. A security control that is deployed to discover or detect unwanted or unauthorized activity. Blank operate after the fact and can discover the activity only after it has occurred. Detective control. A security control that is deployed to provide various options to other existing controls to aid in enforcement and support of security policies. Compensation control. Corrective control. A security control that is an extension of corrective controls but have more advanced or complex abilities. Examples of blank include backups and restores, fault-tolerant drive systems, system imaging, server clustering, antivirus software, and database or virtual machine shadowing. Recovery controls. Directive control. The formal evaluation of a security infrastructure's individual mechanisms against a baseline or reliability expectation. Security control assessment. A key task to perform at the conclusion of a risk analysis. Risk reporting. A guideline or recipe for how risk is to be assessed, resolved, and monitored. Risk framework. T or F. The six-step RMF includes security categorization, security control selection, security control implementation, security control assessment, information system authorization, and security control monitoring. D. A description of specific technologies used in the field of information security. Regulations. Policies are the most crucial element in a corporate information security infrastructure and must be considered long before security technology is acquired and deployed. T or F. Computer security policies come in 4 types. True. Program level policy. This policy establishes the overall approach to computer security. This policy adds detail to the program by describing the elements and organization of the program and department that will carry out the security mission. Program framework policy. This policy addresses specific issues of concern to the organization. These issues could be regulatory in nature, for example, the payment card industry data security standard, Sarbanes-Oxley, or the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, to name a few. Issue-specific policy. This policy focuses on policy issues that management has decided for a specific system. System-specific policy. B. IT security measures should be tailored to meet organizational security goals. Explanation. IT security measures are risk-reducing acts that detect, prevent, or minimize loss associated with the occurrence of a specified threat or category of threats. Laws passed by regulators and lawmakers. Regulations. Topic-specific and system-specific documents that describe overall requirements for security. Standards and baselines. Step-by-step instructions on how to perform a specific security activity. Regulations. Procedures. Asset and data classification. T or F. Common taxonomy for commercial businesses might provide for the following classes: public information, business sensitive or business confidential, customer confidential, trade secret. True. A common taxonomy classification for commercial businesses that is intended for public dissemination. This might include marketing content on a website, direct mail inserts, directories of contact information, published annual reports, and so forth. Public information. A common taxonomy classification for commercial businesses in which can be described as information employees and other insiders need to perform their duties. This can include company directories, invoice information, department budget information, internal policies, and so forth. Business sensitive or business confidential. Customer confidential. Trade secret. T or F. 2 basic types of risk analysis exist: quantitative and qualitative. True. T or F. Most qualitative risk analysis methodologies make use of interrelated elements, threats, vulnerabilities, controls. True. A risk analysis answers what 3 fundamental questions? What am I trying to protect? What is threatening my system? How much time, effort, and money am I willing to spend? Which of the following would be defined as an absence or weakness of a safeguard that could be exploited? A threat, B a vulnerability, C a risk, D an exposure. B a vulnerability. Which of the following should not be addressed by employee termination practices? A. Removal of the employee from active payroll files. B. Return of access badges. C. Employee bonding to protect against losses due to theft. D. Deletion of assigned logout ID and passwords to prohibit system access. A job title establishes and maintains security and risk management programs for information resources. Chief Information Security Officer. A job title maintains policies and procedures that provide for security and risk management of information resources. Information Resources Manager. A job title directs policies and procedures designed to protect information resources. Information Resources Security Officer. A job title have the responsibility of carrying out the program that uses the resources. This does not imply personal ownership. These individuals might be regarded as program managers or delegates for the owner. Owners of information resources. A job title provide technical facilities, data processing, and other support services to owners and users of information resources. Custodians of information resources. A job title provide technical support for security of information resources. Technical managers. A job title conduct periodic risk-based reviews of information resources security policies and procedures. Internal auditors.